Hi everyone, welcome to my studio. This video is the second in a series that documents my process as I create a commissioned bust and a sculpture that captures my thoughts on COVID. This second sculpture is different from the first in terms of technique, materials, and conceptual approach. However, as in the first sculpture, the initial stages is most critical to my process and to me achieving my vision for the sculpture. This video takes you through the initial stages from the maquette to the rough version you see here. So let's get started. This simple maquette establishes the critical points that I will reference as I create the sculpture. Those points of expression would be the shoulders, elbows, and arms, in addition to the placement of the head. The armature is constructed from stainless steel, and I basically just made a copy of the maquette you would have just seen. That is the main importance of the maquette. It allows me to modify and change the pose and expression without having to constantly weld and cut and weld and cut. You will notice I'm making some changes to the base of the maquette. This is to provide more space for the sculpture, as I realized that it was currently a bit constrained. Once I'm happy with the positions of the armature thus far, I securely weld everything and reinforce the armature in preparation for the first layer. I start the first layer by applying a 1/4 inch square wire mesh onto the armature. This will support the cement. This wire mesh is slightly more difficult to apply than the more traditionally used chicken wire. However, it supports the initial layer of cement much better, and I just prefer to use it. You may probably notice that the stainless steel armature almost becomes redundant as I build the wire mesh, as I add the wire mesh. This is true to some extent. I could have simply just made the armature, quote unquote, and out of the wire mesh. But I find that though that I've seen that in textbooks and online, I find having the stainless steel support underneath gives me a bit more comfort and confidence, and adds a bit more strength to the sculpture. It also allows me to make changes with more easily, I should say. I was going to say with more confidence, but I would say with more easily, without compromising the sculpture itself, as you will see shortly. Well, I won't get into the exact mixture of cement that I use because that's a whole video in itself. I can say that the base mixture is essentially coral render, which is coral dust combined with white cement. I also add a plasticizer, and in this first layer I also add a lot of fibers, and this makes this kind of tempers the first layer and allows it to withstand the sculpture itself to withstand a lot more shock. While you will not be able to stop the sculpture from cracking, you will be able to stop it from breaking apart, especially during transport. I've slowed the video down to show you how frustrating it can be sometimes, well, most of the time, when you're applying this first layer onto the wire mesh. There's nothing really for the cement to adhere to. I literally have to push it through the holes in the mesh and allow it to set. It requires some patience, and when you're in a hurry or you're just anxious to build the form, you tend to not be patient and in your enthusiasm, and you may add too much at one time, and then gravity kind of takes over and it falls to the ground and you have to pick it up and apply it again. It's just a matter of being patient and trying not to use abusive language. Even after a number of years of doing this, I still am susceptible to this. So it's just a par for the course when you're doing this type of sculpture, I guess. Mentioned earlier the advantage of using the armature when it comes to making corrections. We see here my first major correction with regard to the sculpture. The torso is too wide. Now this is a simple fix. You just cut it off. What the armature does is allow you to do that with confidence. I have no fear of compromising the integrity of the sculpture because I know there's a stainless steel armature underneath that will support the weight, and you can see where it would be especially weak by the arms, but I don't have to worry because you can still see the stainless steel armature running up through the arms. After I've applied the wire mesh to the correction, you will see me use a plumb bob. This is a very important tool that sculptors use. It's essentially a string with a weight on it, and we use it to ensure that the figure is correct in terms of pose and proportion. I will explain its use in future videos. The main objective of the second layer is to define the major sections of the body. I start with the chest cavity. I do this by applying wet paper. What this does is allows me to build the form quickly and with less material. This is important, especially for a sculpture made of cement. Any weight you can save without compromising structural integrity is always a good thing. So I basically stuff the equivalent of an inch or an inch and a half of, in some areas, of paper, and then cover it with wire mesh and wire. Then I would cover this with cement. After I've covered the wire and paper with the cement, you can see the chest cavity start to form, and then I move on to defining the hips. Those bones you feel at the back, at the top of your hips, those are critical. Those are critical point. I define these sections slowly and carefully, working around the sculpture as I go, checking the different angles and planes so as to avoid any further errors and reduce the time. The third layer refines the forms even further, and you start to see the definition in each of the sections start to evolve. You can start to see the chest cavity, the hips, and as we progress, you will see the shoulders and arms, elbows, etc. start to evolve. I am not interested in details at this point, just like in the bust. I am interested in the major planes and sections of the figure and how they relate to each other. The definition and details will come at a later date, but if you don't have this underlying structure set, you lose the expression and the feeling within the sculpture very quickly. You will notice that in these initial layers, I do not render the hands. The hands are essentially a detail, and they will require the base due to the particular concept of this sculpture. It would require me to have the base in place, which is not practical, because if you have the base in place, it's very difficult to build the forms. So I had to leave the hands out initially, and once I have the form well defined, I can put the sculpture back onto the maquette base, and I can then render the hands. You would have seen how sculpting with cement differs from using clay. It is actually closer to carving wood or stone. While the risks are less because you can easily remove an error, it is not a simple process, as in clay, where you can just move the clay around. In coming videos, you will see how I render the details and add the head. Hope you enjoyed the video.